Let's start with the first one, which is Optus, the PII data breach. So basically, PII is personal identifying information, any kind of information get identified. You as a person, such as name, surname, email address, phone number, driver license number, and all that sort of thing. So the Optus data breach is mainly because of a misconfigured API, which is the application programming interface. So Optus customer data was accessed via an API that allowed anyone who knew about that API to get all those information from Optus environment. So it was an vulnerability which was not known by Optus. The hackers, they got to identify the vulnerability before Optus identified that. They could manage to get the personal details of Optus customers. So the impact was quite significant. 9.8 million Optus customers' personal identifying information was stolen, such as the names, date of birth, phone number, email address, and driver license number. Fortunately, the card number was not part of that breach. So a lot of people ask me that question, all right, do we need to change our driver license? Yes, it is recommended you guys change your driver license, but those informations are not good enough to kind of impersonation or identity theft. Because in Australia, we need both driver license number and the card number. So luckily, the card number was not part of the breach. What was part of the breach was the name, surname, date of birth, phone number, email, address, and driver license number. Quite unfortunate, but the card number was not part of the breach, which is a good thing. So because of that, it is highly recommended to change your driver license number, but you don't really have to. So basically, both financial damage and reputation damage was quite high for Optus. So basically, they have allocated 140 million to cover the cost of the data breach. The reputation damage was quite unfortunate. They have had a lot of interviews. Their CEOs had to come to TV. Definitely, no one wants to be in her shoes. On top of that, Optus has offered for 1 year subscription to credit monitoring and identifying protection services through Equifax and Protect for the most affected customers. So it was a PII data breach. So the biggest danger for the customer is the impersonation and the identity theft. Just as an example, a 20-year-old scanned text message to at least 92 Optus customers. He used the data from the breach to demand $2,000. Anyway, he got captured and there's a charge against that guy. But that's the absolute minimum kind of identity theft or misusing the information. So identity theft or the impersonation is the biggest risk right now for these 9.8 million Optus customers. So at the back of that data breach, the class action has been brought against Optus. The Australian Information Commissioner opened an investigation against them. They have received an extra 5.5 million over 2 years for their involvement in response to the Optus data breach. They have also investigated whether Optus took reasonable steps to protect personal information and whether its data collection practices were necessary and aligned to the privacy principles. The other important thing at the back of this cyber attack and the Medibank and a couple of other is the government has fast-tracked the reforming to the Privacy Act. So the amount of penalty in the Privacy Act was not good enough. So the maximum penalty for the serious breaches has gone up to at least 50 million. So the amended include the higher fines and all that sort of things to the Privacy Act, which is a good outcome for Australia. All the enterprises, especially all the enterprises, if your yearly business revenue is more than 3 million per year, you are liable to report all the cybersecurity incidents. So basically, it's a crime if just hiding an incident, especially if your revenue is above $3 million per year, and all the company directors are liable to report the cybersecurity incident and deal with the consequences. And the Privacy Act, the amendment, include higher fines and very serious consequences. So what we always recommend is better to prevent than cure. Better to have the right security controls. In Optus case, they had the misconfigured API, which from technical perspective, they shouldn't have. So that's why we have some technical recommendations for the APIs. If you guys are dealing with APIs, a lot of the developers, a lot of the architects, engineers, they are working with APIs every day. So the technical takeaways from that cyber attack from technical perspective is use API token authentication with refresh and expiry time. API authorization to be enabled for individual endpoints. API keys and secrets should be stored securely. API read limit and alerting should be configured. API logging should be enabled. Encryption in transit to be used for API endpoints. It's quite important to have encryption in transit for API endpoints. The last but not the least, it's highly recommended when you're using all these API technologies, use security testing. It needs to be done. You need to do SAS testing, which is the static testing. It does the security testing for your code. You need to do DAS security testing as a dynamic testing, and you should definitely consider both internal and external penetration testing to identify the vulnerabilities. So from my perspective, they haven't done this proper testing, SAS, DAS, and penetration testing. Otherwise, they could have identified that they have unauthenticated API and they wouldn't be in the situation they are today. So all this security testing and following the best practices can really avoid you guys to be in a situation like where Optus is today. All right, so that was a little bit of update and technical takeaways for Optus.